When we think of Africa, the image that often comes to mind is one of poor, starving children or a place rich in raw natural resources that can be exploited. But they provide a very incomplete picture of Africa.
This is the new face of the 21st century farmer. The clothes that you're wearing today, it's cotton that has been farmed by the farmer. The shoes that you're wearing, that's leather that comes from the cows that a farmer has.
It's been 200 years since the United States opened its first consulate in sub-Saharan Africa. Throughout the history of Africa's tribes and kingdoms, there is also a common and recurring theme of female warriors who exhibited a sense of collectiveness and intense militarism. Africa's first spaceport opened in 1964 near Malindi, Kenya. In 1970, the first satellite specifically for X-ray astronomy, Uhuru, was launched from Kenya. Why CodeWiz? How did it come about?
I've always had a passion for working with kids, and I've always had a passion for business.
Harvard's Global Health Catalyst Program, which was started by my guest, Dr. Wilfred Ngwa, to bridge the healthcare gap in low and middle income countries. Welcome to Africa2U. I'm Vivian Kobusingye Birchall, your host. My guest is Mr. Melvin Foote, the President and CEO of Constituency for Africa in Washington, D.C. Melvin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Of course, I haven't given the bio to the audience because I want to welcome you to tell us about who you are and what Constituency for Africa is.
Well, I've been working on Africa my whole career. I started out as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer coming out of college, and that was back in 1973. And I went to Ethiopia and Eritrea as a Peace Corps volunteer. And I've been working on Africa ever since. So I got involved in the 60s and 70s during a time of civil unrest here in the United States. And I was very much concerned about the plight of African Americans here. But when I was in college, I had a column in the newspaper, and I called it the back of the bus, because during the time of segregation, Blacks always had to sit at the back of the bus. And so I called my column the back of the bus. So one day a guy wrote me a note and said he wanted to see me, and we met. He was a former white guy who was a former Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana. And he fell in love with a Ghanaian young lady, and he wanted my opinion about interracial marriage. So we talked about that. And of course, I asked him about the Peace Corps, and he told me about the Peace Corps. So my light bulb went off, and I said, oh, that's how I'm going to go to Africa. So I put in my application, and sure enough, a couple months later, I got a letter back from the Peace Corps saying, you've been accepted, and you're going to go to Ethiopia. Well, I didn't know where Ethiopia was at. I thought it was in the Middle East because of the stories in the Bible. You had Jerusalem, you had Bethlehem, and you had Ethiopia. So I said, I don't want to go to the Middle East because there was a war going on. So, back then you couldn't Google or anything. So I went to and found the atlas and saw a map of Africa where Ethiopia was in the heart of Africa. I said, wow, that's how I'm going to go to Africa. So sure enough, I graduated in June. In July, I went with a group headed to the Peace Corps in Ethiopia. I didn't know anything about Africa at the time, because the information about Africa was just so limited. I thought the only information I had on Africa was the Tarzan movies. So I thought that when we landed in Ethiopia, Tarzan would be at the airport to take us to the village in a herd of elephants. That's really what I thought about Africa. I was shocked because we changed planes in Rome to Addis, and the pilot, we got an Ethiopian Airlines, and the pilot was black. Wow, I never knew that a black person could fly one of these airplanes. So that's really how I ended up in Africa. It's a crazy story, but people don't realize I give myself an A in terms of courage because my father thought I would get eaten by a lion, and I was the first one in my family to get a college degree. And so my father wanted me to sell shoes at Sears and Roebuck's. I'm going to Africa. He thought I was going to get eaten by a lion. I didn't know for sure. I think that's a good possibility. I might get eaten by a lion. So I give myself an A in terms of courage. That's how I got involved on Africa.
You know, it's funny you mentioned these stories because I have so many similar stories for when I came to when I moved to the United States. People asking me, you know, very random and interesting questions, including, "Hey, do you have cars in Uganda?" And I just smiled, but in my head, I just wanted to respond back to say, "No, we don't. I actually got my piece of luggage, carried it on my head, walked to the to one port and crossed the other." But I resisted so badly, and I just said, "Yes, we do," and I just left it at that. But that's very interesting. And again, back to Constituency of Africa. How did you create this constituency?
Well, I went to the Peace Corps. I came back. I worked at Meharry Medical College for a couple of years, and I was recruited by an organization called Africa2U. Africa2U does rural development, economic development in Africa, health clinics, water wells, reforestation, and so forth. I went to Somalia as their country director for 3 years. After 3 years, I became known because all my reports and everything, I would put Polaroid pictures to show you, here's the vegetable garden that, and so my bosses at Africa said, wow, this guy can promote. So they started a new effort to educate Americans about Africa. And I was brought back to head that effort up, and it was called development education. So part of my effort, there was a lot of organizations that were working on Africa, but they were doing different things. Trans-Africa with Free South Africa, Free Nelson Mandela. You had African American Institute, you had the Washington Office on Africa, and you had a myriad of other organizations working on Africa, but they weren't working together. Not only were they not working together, they were competing with one another for funding, they were competing for media attention, and so they were just fighting one another. So I decided to harmonize those relationships and build an organization that we actually work together. Everybody's a part of it. We could share information about Africa. We could share access to policymakers. We could promote educating Americans about Africa together. And that was the constituency for Africa. So in 1990, we started CFA. In 1994, it was a project of Africa. In 1994, it was the same month that Nelson Mandela got his freedom. CFA became an independent organization from Africa, and the mission is to educate Americans about Africa, to improve cooperation and coordination among the organizations that work on Africa, and to shape U.S. Africa policy. So that's been the mission of CFA. It's a very small organization. It's always been small. We never had the resources to do what the mission dictates. Part of that is that mainstream America didn't want Americans to be educated about Africa. They did not want cooperation and coordination between African institutions and African American institutions. I still get resistance on that. They didn't want Africans to do business with African Americans. They want the business done with white people. They want it done with American oil companies, and they saw me as an intrusion, and they still see me as somewhat. They keep me a little bit at distance. I still feel that. But nevertheless, CFA rallied the support that we needed. And over the course of, the 30-something years, CFA had managed to, really impact U.S. policy in profound ways. I've been involved in just about every major policy issue concerning Africa over the last 30 years, including the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which CFA did most of the lobbying around the country for. PEPFAR, the President Bush's initiative, $15 billion initiative to combat HIV/AIDS in Africa. CFA did the precursor to that. We called it the AIDS Marshall Plan. And we were shocked when Bush stood to the microphone at the State of the Union and said, $15 billion to combat HIV/AIDS in Africa. But we did the pre-work with Ron Dellum was my chair then, and CFA did that. Rwanda genocide. I talked the White House into flying 40 of us to Rwanda during the genocide to get on a fact-finding mission. And we were on Air Force 2 and, got a chance to see the Rwanda genocide firsthand. And so every issue that you can imagine, one way or another, CFA has been impactful on it. In some cases, we initiated it. President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative. I wrote the paper for that. President Obama sent an envoy to see me when he first came to power. And, the U.S. economy was in a dismal failure at the time. Welcome to the White House, Mr. Black Man. So he knew he couldn't spend time on Africa the way he wanted to, but he wanted to buy time so he could fix the U.S. economy. And he asked me, what could he do, to prop up U.S. support for Africa? So I said, don't spend your time on Mugabe and Biya and Bashir and those guys. Spend your time with the next generation of leaders coming up, the young leaders. He loved the idea. And that became the YALI initiative, which I'm extraordinarily proud of. I think it's the most effective program ever for the US government. So CFA has been involved promoting the Biden-Harris ticket. I'm pushing for an African-American or other American of African descent to be the Assistant Secretary for Africa. I've already done some op-eds on it. I've already lobbied Congresswoman Karen Bass and some others. We've been fighting for that for the last 20 years, and we've succeeded with two exceptions. One, George W. Bush chose Walter Kansteiner to be the Assistant Secretary, but he had Colin Powell as Secretary of State and Condoleezza Rice as National Security Advisor, so I couldn't say anything, And then, of course, Trump took Tibor Nagy as his Assistant Secretary. Nagy is a very nice guy, but look at the policy. We haven't done anything in the last 4 years, very little. And so I'm pressing hard for the Assistant Secretary position, and I'm pressing hard for the Biden-Harris administration to support the vaccination campaign in Africa for COVID-19 and support the continental free trade area that has been formulated on the continent.
Absolutely. Before I even go to the next prepared question for you, you've mentioned very many things that I had wanted to talk about. The first is you have been the CFA has existed for over 3 decades now, for about 3 decades. And you have influenced US policy regarding Africa in many different ways. And now with this new administration, recently, President Biden released a statement to the African Union Summit, and I got that statement from the State Department and posted it. And I was having a conversation with one of the officers there, who communications, and one of the questions she asked me was, "Hey, what was the response to the remarks?" And I said, I didn't really notice any response, much of a response from either the diaspora or mainland people in continental Africa. But I mentioned that I was going to have a conversation with you today, and that I would pick your brain on whether you've heard a response from the diaspora or from Africa regarding those remarks, as a way, because it was, I think, President Biden's first move, or one of the first moves toward recognizing that there is a need for this relationship to be rebuilt after the past 4 years. What are your thoughts on that? I know it's
I've of course, in the policy community that I operate in, sure enough, it was well received. It was well received out of the State Department. It was well received by the Ambassador Corps. It was well received by the Congressional Black Caucus. On the one hand, it has been well received. I would say that the problem has been the communication of it. It has not filtered down to the diaspora as you might expect. There's so many other things going on. The Trump people trying to overthrow the government. We're trying to impeach the president, former president. We're just doing so many. We got COVID-19 response. Everybody's trying to get their shot. There's so much going on now that I don't think it filtered out properly to the diaspora. There hasn't been a whole lot of conversation about it, but everybody that I've talked to who have heard the remarks are very impressed with it, very pleased with it. I'm very pleased with it. I posted it. I shared it with my constituency, but I don't think it has rolled out the way it need to roll out. I don't think in Africa or here, but don't take that as a negative. We got work to do to make sure the public is informed about it. And so I thought it was an extraordinary statement. I think it set the right tone. Given what the administration is faced with domestically. I have to give them an A+ so far in terms of the quality of people that they've chosen for the administration and for the cabinet. And I give them an A+ for how they have reached out to Africa, in the early stages. And I think it bodes well for the future.
Absolutely. And of course, we were having conversations or we brainstormed about what it might require for this information to get down to the people who need it, and not just people who are already, just to trickle down to people that need it, just like you mentioned, who are, especially now that the African Union is trying to push, first of all, Agenda 2063, and also the free continental trade area. So I guess those are conversations we can have later about how best to engage the diaspora and Africa.
But I have to say this, and I want to say it early before I forget. I'm getting older, so I have to say things when it comes to my mind, because 10 minutes from now, I don't forgot about it. But the biggest problem we have is that we refuse to get organized. The diaspora is like a herd of cats. You try to tell the cats all to walk in a straight line, ain't gonna happen, And you got African Americans over here. You got African immigrants over there. You got Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinos over here. And we refuse any kind of sense of coordination. Like, I personally don't see myself as a leader. I never have framed myself as the leader of the diaspora. There cannot be a leader of a diaspora. It just doesn't make any kind of sense. But there can be coordination. There can be facilitation. It doesn't tell you anything about who you are, your culture. It doesn't even tell you about your political view. You might be Republican, you might be Democrat, you might be something else. But what it says is, okay, can we reach agreement on the continental free trade area? Can we reach agreement on what we would want to see as Assistant Secretary of State for Africa? Can we reach an agreement on trade policies with Africa? Can we reach agreement on democracy on the continent? And it's been the most perplexing thing about my work is the inability for the diaspora to organize itself. And I tell you, it plays into the hand of those who don't want Africa to move forward. There are people out there who are pitting African Americans against African immigrants. This disinformation, as you said, you were told things about us before coming here, and I was told things about you. And some of that was intentional to make sure we have no synergy among ourselves. The African immigrants over here are encouraged to identify with their own personal roots. So it leads toward wars, it leads toward conflict. The region is continually in uproar because they refuse. And if you join one side or you disagree with one side, you're the enemy. And so I don't know how we get past that one. I think it's a next generation challenge because those older ones are just stuck in our place, and we refuse any effort to organize and to coordinate ourselves in the interests of Africa and African people.
There has to be a way forward, just like the Jews have done it. The Indians are doing it. The Chinese community is doing it. Why not the African community or the Black diaspora or African diaspora?
I'm leaving that one for the next generation. That one for the ones who are 18, 19 right now. They got to solve that one. But I'm convinced that for the older crowd, is all you want to hope for is some level of coordination.
Right.
But to think that we're going to get organized to actually do some things, to actually strategically implement some policies, I'm not sure that it's going to happen.
Well, let me first get back to our Black history conversation, Mr. Foote. From your experience with the CFA over the 3 decades, what has been your observation of the trends of the United States-Africa relations over the decades, and in what ways has Black history been significant in the United States?
Well, I can say, as it relates to Africa, by and large, you have bipartisan support. When I look back at the players on Africa who have done things, they've been Republicans like Jack Kemp, Ed Royce. There have been Democrats like Donald Payne and Karen Bass and Charlie Rangel. It hasn't been a partisan issue. So there's general support in the U.S. Congress for Africa. And I think that support has increased over time. I think we've done some significant things. It was George W. Bush who did $15 billion for PEPFAR, who was a Republican, and so it hasn't been a partisan fight. I think Americans have, by and large, been sympathetic to issues on the continent and have done what they could to respond to it. And so I think that will continue. Also, I think that the African side has stepped up to a certain degree, forming the Africa Union. Now we got the Continental Trade Agreement. These are major initiatives. I'm seeing initiatives to address some of the conflicts on the continent. You have the Africa Center for Disease Control that's taking a leadership on health issues on the continent. So I see a lot of progress. I see women playing an increasing role in Africa. When I got started, a woman plays within the kitchen. And now you look at Rwanda, and maybe 70% of the parliament are women. You had several heads of state. The new deputy chairperson for the African Union is a woman from Rwanda, I believe. So I think that the young people have stepped up. I think YALI has played a tremendous role on the continent, and you're going to see a YALI president soon, for sure. I met 10,000 YALI participants since I've been, since the program's inception, and I can't say I met not one that I wasn't impressed with, And so you got all of this talent that's moving around Bamako and Lusaka and Johannesburg and Accra, all of this young talent in all sectors that's moving up, And so I think that the young people are, sure, we got some of these leaders are intransigent. During the Trump administration, a lot of them saw this as the way to step on the constitutions, to step on any progress. So you got 80-year-old Biya, and you got 80-year-old Obiang, and you got 80-year-old Museveni, and you got Cote d'Ivoire Ouattara over there, and you got Condé. Come on, how many times you got in Brazzaville? I think we're seeing the last vestiges of that. And I think Africa is going to move forward in a more positive, dynamic fashion going forward. So I'm very optimistic about Africa. It's a very resilient place. We're seeing all kinds of leadership coming out of Africa. We're seeing talent rise all over the place. Everything from basketball, sports, to art and culture, to technology, to money, the electronic currency. Everything is being pioneered in Africa. So I'm personally very optimistic about the future of Africa and the future of African people.
Well, thank you, Mr. Foote. I know you've mentioned some of what I'm going to ask you next, and that is, what are some of the key collaborations that the United States has had with some different countries in Africa? You've talked about the malaria initiative and a few more, but if I could ask the question again, what are some key collaborations that the U.S. government has had with the continent?
Well, of course, we know about the big things. We know about the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. We know about PEPFAR. We know about some of the security stuff in Rwanda. But we've been remiss in some things. Right now the Sahel is an area that is in dire straits. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad.
Chad, yeah.
And but the problem didn't start with Africa. The problem started with the Middle East, our war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. And what happened was that we defeated the terror organizations in the Middle East. They migrated south. It just so happened that Libya, during Obama's time, Gaddafi fell, and we were supportive of that, honestly. And but what happened was the military hardware in Libya, which was substantial. Gaddafi had a tremendous military. All of that military hardware fell into the hands of the terrorists. What did they do? They took it south across the Sahara and started to attack the Saharan states. And during the Trump administration, of course, our response to them is, you need to spend more on your own military. and of course, buy American weapons, and buy them from us. Here, these countries are trying to promote education programs, healthcare, build clinics, and deal with human security issues. All of a sudden, they didn't have the resources to do that, and these young people turned toward terror. They were paid $500 to join the army. Come on. And so, I think the U.S. is going to have to step up. And first of all, we need to admit that the problem in the Sahel is our problem. We created it. We allowed it to happen, and we need to be a major part of the solution to that, and definitely support the frontline states. So I think there's a lot for us to do in terms of support for governance and so forth. We can't lecture Africa about democracy after January, after what happened on January the 6th here. We have to be careful about lecturing Africa on democracy. But we can say that despite the attempt at taking out our government, the American institutions held, and so to me that speaks of strengthening democratic institutions, and we can support that in Africa. We can support some things to make Africa more democratic. Allow for, here you got Bobby Wine, who's my old friend in Uganda. If Bobby Wine, the 40-year-old, speaks loud, I don't know his politics that well, but I can say that an 80-year-old man is beating down a 40-year-old man. Come on, what is this about? So I think that the future is the future, and I'm expecting a tremendous improvement. And I think the U.S. government will be supportive of the future of Africa and respectful of African desire, strengthening the Africa Union and strengthening African institutions to promote democracy, governance, and economic development on the continent.
And speaking of Bobby Wine, and there is one thing about Africa, one strength, which is the large youth population. Can you speak to that? How can Africa tap into that strength to make Africa grow and better? And how can also the U.S. government tap into that strength?
Well, the same thing is true all over the world, really, but we're seeing it really played out in a big kind of way in Africa. And I think Africa is the future. One thing I can say about the young people in Africa, they're hungry for education, And so now with the digital technology, we're having this conversation on Zoom right now. Well, the same thing is playing out in Africa. You're seeing a lot more digital technology as a way of educating people, reaching rural populations, doing all kinds of things. So we're seeing innovative approaches with drone technology, delivering medicines and that kind of thing.
In Rwanda, yeah.
And we're seeing also the continent. The one thing about YALI, although these 10,000 young people came from different countries in Africa, they met each other. So you got the Kenyan who met the Swaziland. You met the Namibian who know now the Senegalese, and they're Googling each other. They're communicating with each other. So the continent is going to become much more unified in years to come because the people in Africa, the young ones coming up, are more unified thinking. We're talking about an African passport now. So, it won't be a problem for a Nigerian to go to Zimbabwe, So I think you're going to see more movement of people across the continent, more goods and services going to go across the continent. We've always known that Africa needs to sell to African and buy from Africans. And if you look at the economic models in Africa, the raw products, the minerals are taken to the coast and put on a ship and shipped to Europe, shipped to the United States and other parts. They're not manufactured in Africa. So I think we're going to see a lot more manufacturing, a lot more job creation on the continent that speaks to the youth. But I think there's going to be a lot more education opportunity. I think there's going to be a lot more linkages between Africa and the diaspora. There's no reason why we can't have a business. I know people right now who are living in the U.S., Americans, who are doing business with people in agriculture projects in the Congo and Namibia and places like that. So I envision a more global partnerships emerge, which is going to speak to the next generation who are digitally connected, and information flow is going to be. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Right.
I think that with more young people assuming power in Africa, more women assuming power in Africa, there's going to be a much more desire and willingness to share the wealth and to spread the knowledge across the continent.
Right. It's interesting you talk about the youth and the trade and the improvement in the economy of countries in Africa. About 2 years ago, I was invited to speak at the UN at the margins of the SouthSouth Global Compact and Migration. So one of the things, my topic was about how to engage the diaspora to promote the South-South cooperation, because it is the way to go. Instead of having the South-North where Africans are migrating here, how can we tap into the diaspora to encourage South-South cooperation in order to provide, a thriving economy for these young people? So I think, just related to what you just talked about, the young people moving the economy now, even with the digital economy, although there are still concerns that, the digitization has not happened in the rural areas. It's mostly centered in the urban areas. And that is, of course, another one of the things that the African countries are going to have to address. But maybe I could also pose the same question to you. How can the diaspora really participate in encouraging the South-South cooperation between African countries?
Well, we have our annual conference in September, and one of the forums was on trade and investment with Africa. We had 5 panelists. All the 5 panelists were African Americans who live in Africa. We had one in Namibia, one in South Africa, one in Ghana, one in Kenya, and it really was interesting to hear from their perspective. Oh, I'm from Lansing, Michigan, and I now live in, and talking about the business opportunities and that kind of thing. Last year was the year of return in Ghana. And the president of Ghana invited a number of African-American high-profile people to come to Ghana to celebrate this year of return. A lot of them, for the first time in Africa, were really excited about it. I'm expecting a lot more of that to take place. More of the countries are reaching out to diaspora. They're trying to find ways of integrating diaspora. They're offering passports and that kind of thing. I'm involved in an effort in ECOWAS. They're planning a conference for diaspora, and I'll be heavily involved in that. So I just think, when Africa was colonized, the Europeans were keen on the fact that getting these countries to divide them up, fragment them. Some of these countries are not big enough to be a country. They're not as big as Boston. Yet you're calling yourself Togo, or you're calling yourself, Benin. You're a little small place. That means if you're a country, you got to have an army. You got to have an embassy, you got to have ambassadors, you got to have all this kind of thing, money going out, So I think there's a real desire to put some of this to rest. And that means regional cooperation. That means, breaking down the barriers that prevent us from moving and doing things together. And then that expanded out means the diaspora is part of Africa. I'm an African, just happen to be living in Washington. But
the sixth region.
Yeah, and the fact that African Americans, in my mind, we're probably the most Pan-African of all Africans, because we love Africans from Cape Town to Cairo. We don't discriminate between a Zimbabwean and a Nigerian. For us, we love Africa. We're African. Oh no, I'm from. They can't see themselves as part of a region, and so when you start talking to them about issues, they're talking about a little small. 100,000 people, and so we got to get past some of that stuff. And I'm hopeful that with some of the conversations going on with YALI and elsewhere, we're going to see improvement of that going forward.
Well, Mr. Foote, thank you again for that. Well, I wanted to go into COVID. The world has been seriously impacted by COVID at varying degrees, of course. You recently held a workshop with the head of the Africa CDC to discuss the trends of COVID-19 in Africa. What were the key highlights of this meeting?
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about CFA. We are linked in with the leadership in Africa, and we have a very frank, honest kind of relationship conversations. John and Kinglesong, when they launched the Africa CDC in 2017, invited me to come to Addis to be part of the launch. So I went there, and it really was a fantastic type thing. And he's a fantastic person. And so, you know, our job is to make sure the diaspora is informed about the plight of COVID-19. You know, the COVID-19 has not hit Africa the same way it hit Europe, partly because you got the young population, you know. That's a major factor there, that Africa's population is so young. Whereas you go to Europe, you're dealing with old people, you know, and we all know that COVID hits old people disproportionately than with young people. But that doesn't mean Africa is going to escape. It has been hard hit also. And there's evidence that there's a mutant strain in South Africa that is somewhat resistant to the current vaccine regimen. So we're going to have a follow-up with Dr. Nkosang, Africa CDC, on the 25th of February. And we're partnering with the diaspora in Canada, so we have a bigger network. But we'll be hearing from policymakers, as well as we'll be briefed by John and Nkosang about Africa's strategy for vaccinating the continent. And, you know, they have strategies. They're sitting down just like we're sitting down over here to roll out strategies. They're dealing with sort of apartheid when it comes to the vaccine regimen. The Western countries are hoarding the vaccines. And, you know, we want to take care of us. And the British are taking care of Britain. But the reality is, unless we deal with the globe and deal with all people, no vaccine strategy is going to be successful. And so, you know, so we're pulling together the diaspora and U.S. policymakers and Canadian policymakers to have this conversation about the strategy for vaccinating Africa against COVID-19. There are some promising research coming out of Africa. Africans are looking at genome of the continent for the first time. And they're one of the things I met when I did go to the Africa CDC, I was amazed at the brilliance of African technology. I was amazed at the high level of, I was the dumbest person in the room. I was the only one there without a PhD, and sometimes I felt guilty even talking the way these guys were showing their research capability. But, you know, again, I think Africa is going to be okay. And I think the African Union has taken this on seriously. I think the countries in Africa are doing their best to mobilize the resources to address the needs of the people. And we as a diaspora must be supportive of the African strategy to vaccinate the continent.
Yeah, and actually the president of Rwanda, His Excellency Kagame, penned an op-ed about the same about 2 days ago, urging the international community to take a vaccination of Africa more seriously if there's going to be a change made. And just my final question for you today, given that this is Black History Month, in what ways has is your organization making an impact on the Black lives during Black History Month?
Well, actually, I think Black history should take place 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So when I look at Black History Month, I don't see no difference between March, April, November, December. You know, every day is Black History Day, you know, and that's my line. I'm going to stick with it, you know. I mean, I'm all for, you know, having some special focus. I think Black History Month is more for white people than it is for Black people. This is a month that we can force them to learn something about us, but we should be learning about ourselves every single day, and I'm sticking to that.
Excellent. I think I kind of leaned toward that school of thought as well, but anyway, it's been an honor, Mr. Foote, to host you here. It's been a very enriching conversation. I certainly look forward to bringing you more often to just have these conversations, because we, like you mentioned earlier, we have to figure out ways of disseminating this information and continuing the dialogue, because there isn't one leader of the diaspora, as you say. There's going to be mobilization.
All of us are leaders. All of us are deputized. You're deputized, I'm deputized. That's the only way we're going to move forward. And it should be mutual respect. You know, those who get it should kind of say, okay, we get it. Let's work together. Let's collaborate. Let's cooperate. You know, that's the mission. And we got to know that the ancestors, the Nelson Mandelas, are looking down on us. and want to ensure that we are going to carry this ball forward. But the only way we're going to do it is we share it, we impact each other, we knowledge, share the knowledge and embrace one another as sisters and brothers in the diaspora.
And of course, I would like to thank Dr. Ngwa, who has made this happen. He's an amazing Cameroonian-born researcher at Brigham and Women's and Dana-Farber.
Let me say this about Cameroon. Cameroon got the most brilliant people. I mean, I see them all over the place, anyway.
Okay, say something good about Uganda.
It's the pearl of Africa. It's a beautiful country. I've been there. I met Museveni. I met Bobby Wine. Uganda is a wonderful country.
Amen. Anyway, again, it was an honor hosting you, Dr. Melvin Foote. Mr. Foote, sorry, what's the right title now?
Don't call me doctor. Don't call me doctor. People get mad at that, but I like the title. I'm looking for an honorary doctor, by the way. If you can find Harvard or somebody want to give somebody an honorary doctor degree, I'm your guy.
Anyway, thank you again, Mr. Foote, for being my guest on Africa2U. We look forward to hosting you again. And to our viewers, if you have any questions or any story about Africa, write to us at africa2u.vivian@gmail.com. Again, it's africa2u.vivian@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. Till next time.